While General Becker was in Paris, Count de Lavalette, the Emperor's faithful friend, had arrived at Malmaison, was giving His Majesty a report on the frame of mind in the capital. All were anxiously awaiting for the moment when the Emperor would call for his horses to place himself at the head of the army. When General Becker returned and put an end to our illusions of happiness, the provisional government had refused the Emperor's offer. His Majesty read the note addressed to the Duke Bassano. Marais then, without revealing any emotion, gave orders for his departure. Once back in his quarters, accompanied by the Grand Marshal, he said, "Those people are destroying France." He removed his garde chasseur uniform, donned a brown coat with blue pants and riding boots, and placed a round, broad-brimmed hat on his head. The Emperor was chatting while dressing, with the calm of a serene soul that had wished until the very end to defend the interests of the country. He went into the drawing room, where he found Queen Hortense, whose tears moved him and who proved full of devotion and kindness. He went out with her into the garden, but did not want her to go any further. He embraced the princess for the last time, said a final goodbye to the few friends who were there, as well as Mesdames de Vincenza, Caulaincourt, Caffarelli, and Walewska, handed his horse to the equerry, Baron de Monteran, and walked away from friends who were all bursting into tears as he approached the small park gate. A coach hitched to 4 post horses that had to be preceded by Amodru. A groom acting as outrider had been waiting there for nearly an hour. The Emperor climbed in, followed by General Becker, the Grand Marshal, and Duke of Rovigo, Savary, who were accompanying him. All 3 dressed in civilian clothes. Saint-Denis, who was to ride the top seat, had put in ample provisions, and as many pairs of pistols as there were passengers, keeping 2 pairs for himself. I had placed 20,000 francs in gold in a small coffer to be used as needed on the way. Leaving Malmaison by this transverse road, the Emperor came to Rambouillet. In spite of all the precautions taken, His Majesty could not escape the eyes of the good people who stopped near his coach and cried, "Vive l'Empereur!" It was now 5:30 on June 29th, 1815. Horses were hitched to the coaches, and the supply vans loaded with silver and linen belonging to the Emperor. Knowing that the baggage was to leave as soon as His Majesty's coach had departed, I had in great haste picked up all that belonged to the Emperor to place it in my carriage and climb in only after seeing the vans underway. I shook the hands of a few people present, who embraced me with tears in their eyes and despair in their hearts. There were 2 convoys, the one with 3 carriages, the Emperor's coupe, in which General Gourgaud rode, mine, and a supply van headed for Rambouillet, the other convoy, with carriages bearing the imperial coat of arms under the guidance of Count de Montalon, carrying Madame de Montalon and her son, Count de Lacassis and his son, and all the rest of the entourage, headed for Angoulême and then to Rochefort. Countess Bertrand and her children came along by another road. All were to rendezvous at Rochefort. General Gourgaud headed the army and the convoy, and we followed. In spite of the crowded conditions in my carriage, I made room for Monsieur Mangot, the Emperor's doctor, and Totin, the head butler. So as to not have too large a sum of gold with me, I gave part of it to General Gourgaud, who kept it with him and gave it back to me later. On each of the outside seats of our 2 carriages were a footman and a wardrobe boy. These different routes had been ordered so that we would not run short of horses. On the hill before arriving in Grécy, the Emperor spotted Amodru, his groom, next to his coach. He was to order the horses along the road, followed by the Emperor. Over his civilian dress, he wore a hunting knife and the belt of a household groom's. The Emperor had told him by Saint-Denis to remove that knife, which would only serve to have him recognized. Civilian dress did not include it. Amodru obeyed, but angrily. He went on ahead to prepare the horses in Coignières, where the Emperor was to change teams, but in actuality took the road for Versailles and disappeared. When he arrived at that post house, the Emperor was strangely surprised not to find horses ready. He asked Saint-Denis where Amodru could be, as the master of the post had seen no one. It was thought that he had taken the wrong road and would be found at Rambouillet, but he never showed up. This man, whose conduct had always been perfect, who had followed the Emperor to Elba and throughout all his campaigns, had abandoned his master for no reason. Santini, who was in this convoy, got on horse and served as outrider from Rambouillet to Rochefort. The postilions who brought the Emperor to Coignières had a good idea that the Emperor was in that coach. but said nothing to the others. They were paid only regular price along the way to avoid drawing attention. On the road some distance from Rambouillet, His Majesty encountered a Polish cavalry unit wearing the uniform of the Vistula Legion heading for Versailles. Although the orders of the provisional government were that the emperor was not to stop in any town, when His Majesty arrived at the main gate of Rambouillet Park, he expressed his desire to stop there. Saint-Denis had the park gate opened. The emperor went down the drive to the chateau. There he was greeted by Monsieur Hebert, one of his former valets in Egypt, who had asked him for that post as concierge. He hastened to make everything available to the emperor. Saint-Denis, to whom I owe the details of this journey, told me that once supper was served, the emperor sat down, but no one spoke. After 15 minutes, the emperor got up from the table and went back to his room, followed by the grand marshal, who emerged half an hour later, saying that the emperor was not feeling well, had gone to bed, and would wait until the next day to continue his journey. The emperor had arrived at that residence at 8 p.m. The convoy, led by General Gourgaud, arrived much later. The emperor was in bed. During the night, he asked for some tea, which restored a little perspiration. His agitation ceased. Sleep came to him, and the next day, his slight illness had vanished. The Grand Marshal, the Duke of Rovigo, Savary, and Generals Becker, Gourgaud took the room next to his and spent the night there. In circumstances such as these, the stomach calls for little food. The sorrow shown by Monsieur Hebert, the emperor's worthy servant, was so great and deep that Saint-Denis and I sought to restore calm to his spirit and did not think of eating. I ate little and spent part of the night reflecting on the destiny that brought us to this hunting lodge where I had known the emperor so powerful. On a throne he was now leaving, not knowing what land of exile he would reach. For at this time, St. Helena, which had been mentioned in Elba, was far from my mind. The next day, June 30th, I told the emperor my fear of having been separated from him when I found no horses prepared along the road and my surprise at Amadou's disappearance. I told him that as I was about to get into the carriage, his secretary, Monsieur Ratturi, had told me his wife's health was too deplorable to allow him to leave her all alone. He asked me to assure His Majesty that the 3,000 francs pension the emperor proposed to give him when he planned on accompanying him would not be drawn by either him or his wife. The emperor nevertheless told the Grand Marshal to cancel that pension that was close to be paid by Monsieur Lafitte. He also told me to stop to help Count Bertrand choose some good books from the library of this residence, as well as a selection of maps, and to send it all to Rochefort. He sent a letter to the furnishings administrator to have a van sent to Rochefort, and another to his librarian, Monsieur Barbier, to have him send 2,000 volumes from the Trianon Library, as well as the great opus on Egypt. The same night, Colonel Bellini and his wife arrived at Rambouillet. Both had been in Elba. They proposed to follow him to the United States. Madame Bellini was dressed as a man. Though very grateful for this proof of attachment, the emperor appeared disturbed by it, and told the Grand Marshal that his retinue was already very large, and they should be encouraged to return to Paris. I told the emperor they were penniless and unable to return there without help from His Majesty. The emperor had me give them 3,000 francs to attend to their more pressing needs. I saw Madame Bellini, who was in deep despair. She reminded me of the emperor's kindness to her in Elba, and could not understand his refusing to let her accompany him in his second exile, when she had come to find him in the first. She calmed down, however, and said she would make preparations to go to the United States. Before getting into his coach, the emperor had Monsieur Hebert come in, said a few consoling words to him, and promised not to forget him. This was not an idle promise. On his deathbed, the emperor listed him in his will for 50,000 francs, and had 10,000 francs in gold given to him, foreseeing he would not be left for long in the position of concierge he had given him. In the morning, the emperor had me tell Santini to have horses ready along the road he was to take from Rambouillet to Rochefort. At 11 a.m., the emperor left his residence. The population had been rushing to the chateau gates since morning, waiting to see him. When the carriage pulled away, they cried, "Vive l'Empereur!" His Majesty went through the park to rejoin the road at Chartres. The next day, July 1st, he was in Tours, where he stopped only a moment. One of his former chamberlains, Monsieur de Mirmont, whom the Duke of Rovigo, Savary, had sent for, came immediately to invite the emperor to come rest at the prefecture. He assured him he had nothing to fear from the population, who were full of gratitude for all he had done in the region. The emperor thanked him and continued his journey as far as Poitiers, where he stopped to dine at the Hôtel de la Poste, just outside of town. Until then, nothing had come to disturb the safety of the travelers, except for a point between Saint-Amand and Tours, where several horses were heard galloping. It was night, very dark, and they could see nothing. It was only when the riders drew close that Saint-Denis recognized the two gendarmes, and so advised the Duke of Vigo. They asked Saint-Denis who was on the top seat, who was in that coach. He replied that they were general officers going to Niort. Both gendarmes moved closer to the coach, removed their hats, and informed the Duke of Vigo, who asked them what they wanted, that a few brigands were in the vicinity, and they had been ordered to warn travelers of this. They offered their services, which were not accepted, and moved off, wished them a safe journey. After resting for a few hours from the oppressive heat and freshening up to get rid of the troublesome dust, the emperor left the Hôtel de la Poste around 4 p.m. He arrived there at 11 a.m. When he arrived in Saint-Mexon, the local population was stirred at seeing a coach drawn by 4 horses stopped in front of the post house. They were eager for the news, hoping to have some from travelers coming from Paris, and the crowd was getting larger, as happens in these cases. The passports had been demanded and had not come back. General Becker signaled a gendarmerie officer who was trying to get through the crowd to come over to him. The officer soon recognized General Becker, under whom he had served. Complying with the wish that had been expressed, he went to the city hall and soon returned with not only the passports, but a safe conduct issued by the municipality. This crowd wished no harm, Saint-Denis said to me, but their curiosity to see the travelers bordered on indiscretion. It could very well happen, in spite of the emperor's disguise, that someone in the crowd might recognize him, and he would thus become the object of an ovation he did not wish. As soon as the passports were returned, the horses left at a gallop for Niort, through the crowd that moved aside to let them pass. Along the way, there was a rather long hill to climb. The emperor stepped down, as well as his companions, and they walked some distance behind the coach. Saint-Denis was walking alongside it when he was joined by a neighboring farmer who, traveling along the same road, had looked at the emperor closely. He approached Saint-Denis, asking who the travelers were. Saint-Denis answered, "They are generals going to Niort." As they walked, he asked him for news of Paris with anxious curiosity about the emperor's fate. This man had served under the consulate and the empire. Wounded in the early campaigns, he had returned home and tended his fields. He told Saint-Denis his joy at seeing the tricolor flying again from the church steeple in his village, and his disappointment at perhaps seeing again the white flag, considering that party's hatred of the blues. While conversing, they reached the crest of the hill. The coach stopped, and so did the farmer, hat in hand. He greeted the travelers who were getting back into the coach, and they returned his greetings, speeding off as fast as their horses would take them. At 8 p.m., the emperor arrived in Niort, very tired, and expressed his desire to rest there. The coach was taken to the Boule d'Or Inn. Up to that point, the emperor had not been recognized along the road. On July 2nd, he arrived in Niort, where his brother Joseph joined him. The most comfortable room in that modest hotel was located above the kitchen. A simple wooden floor separated the two rooms, allowing all that was said there to be heard. The supper was mediocre, and the bed prepared for the emperor quite uncomfortable, in spite of all Saint-Denis did to make it bearable. No one in the hotel suspected the importance of the travelers. After supper, the emperor went to bed and told Saint-Denis to put a nightlight in the fireplace, which was contrary to his habits. As usual, Saint-Denis slept across the door, so as to be awakened at His Majesty's first call. The noise from the room below the emperor's bedroom did not allow him to sleep. At 3 a.m., someone knocked on the door of the room where Saint-Denis slept. He went to open it and asked what they wanted. They were 2 gendarmerie officers who wanted to talk with the Duke of Vigo, Savary, and General Becker. He pointed to the rooms of those gentlemen. The emperor, who couldn't sleep, asked Saint-Denis what it was, and he told him. Soon afterwards, our carriages, held up at the New York gate for passport verification, arrived at the Boule d'Or and roused the whole hotel. The emperor summoned General Gourgaud immediately and asked how we could be so much later than he. The general told him that our carriages stopped in Saint-Marchand had been impounded at an inn until our passports were examined. Only then did he realize that nothing had been filled in on any of them. He had hastened to fill them all in before someone came to ask for them. And thus, this official examination had wasted 2 hours, spent having a rather poor lunch. The emperor learned how Colonel Bourgeois of the gendarmerie, on recognizing General Gourgaud, had rushed over with General Saulnier, to offer his services to the emperor. The prefect, Mr. Bush, informed of the emperor's presence in town, came immediately to place the prefecture building at his disposal, as well as his carriage, hitched up to the inn courtyard to take him there. Soon the news of this presence spread all over town. The second hussars mounted their horses. Everywhere excitement prevailed, changing the emperor's resolve to leave that same morning as he had planned, and leading him to accept the prefect's hospitality and rest at his house, as he had not been able to do at the Boule d'Or. As soon as he arrived at the prefecture, the emperor went to bed. But while he slept, the population awoke and joined in the happiness of the 2 regiments garrisoned in that town. They talked of nothing short of begging the emperor to join the army of the Loire, commanded by Generals Lamarck, Clausel, and Breillet, along with a division of the Young Guard, since my carriage contained considerable sums. I did not want to leave it in the courtyard of the inn. I had requested horses to have it taken to the prefecture. I was strolling as I waited when General Lalemant arrived to join the emperor. Surprised to see him alone, I asked how it happened that General de la Boissière was not with him. He replied that, yielding to family pressure, he had remained in Paris, confident about the terms of the surrender, and all he had said to him could not make him change his mind. He went to join the emperor at the prefecture. A 48-hour halt in this town allowed King Joseph to join His Majesty there, as did Countess Bertrand. The arrival of so many eminent people in the city of Niort had stirred the whole population, and the acclamations of the people every time the emperor appeared gave him a well-deserved feeling of pride and spoke highly of his administration in that department. All the staff carriages had remained in the courtyard of the inn, and the emperor's and mine were brought to the prefecture. I was waiting for the emperor to wake up before I went in when he called for me. It was 11 a.m. General Lalemant, who had just arrived from Paris, gave him news of that city that spurred the imagination, and King Joseph, arriving later that day, added to it. General Clausel joined without hesitation any plan that meant a march on Paris. General Breillet had given proof of his devotion from Lyon all the way to Paris during the return from Elba, so his cooperation could be counted on. Only General Lamarck showed little enthusiasm, which could well have changed had the emperor's mind been firmly made up. He was at present yielding to the influences around him and let others approach these generals. That evening, there was a dinner at the prefecture to which the town, civil, and military authorities were invited. Bands from the various regiments were heard, and a large crowd sang patriotic tunes in honor of the emperor. In the evening, the town was illuminated. That evening, General Gourgaud was sent to Rochefort to inquire if it was possible, when leaving the Gironde, to avoid the British cruisers by going through the Montmasson Pass on a light ship and joining its seat an American vessel whose captain's assistance had been assured by King Joseph. In returning home that evening, the emperor told me he had thought of sending me to wait for him at Rochefort, but that I would leave with him only on the following day. The evening at the prefecture had lasted until 11 p.m. As he retired, the emperor told me to come in at 3 a.m. to be in the coaches at 4. Taking advantage of the emperor's stop in New York, General Becker wrote the following report to the government. In order to hasten my report to the provisional government, I am informing it by special courier that the emperor has arrived in New York, tired and very concerned about the fate of France. Without having been recognized, the emperor was greatly touched by the concern with which the people were inquiring of him along the way, and the expressions of interest made him say several times, "The government doesn't know the mood in France. It was too anxious to have me leave Paris, and had it accepted my proposal, things would have turned around. It could still exercise, in the name of the nation, a great influence on political matters by backing up the government's negotiations with an army for which my name would serve as a rallying point." Arriving in New York, His Majesty was informed by the Rochefort Maritime Prefect that, by doubling its cruisers and its vigilance since June 29th, the British squadron had rendered impossible any exit by vessels. The Emperor had General Becker write in the following letter to the Prefect. In these conditions, the Emperor wishes the Ministry of the Navy to authorize the captain of the frigate he will be boarding to communicate with the commander of the British squadron, should extraordinary circumstances render this move indispensable, as much for the Emperor's personal safety as to spare France the pain and shame of seeing him removed from this last refuge and delivered into the hands of his enemies. Under these difficult circumstances, we are anxiously awaiting news from Paris. We hope the capital will defend itself and that the enemy will give you time to see the outcome of the negotiations undertaken by your ambassadors and to reinforce the army to cover Paris. This sentence and the last were dictated by the emperor. If in this situation the British cruisers prevent the frigates from departing, you may call upon the emperor to serve as a general, as his only consideration is being of use to the motherland. Signed, Lieutenant Colonel Count Becker. On the 3rd, at 4 a.m., the emperor thanked the New York prefect for his cordial and frank hospitality and climbed into his coach, escorted by a platoon of the 2nd Hussars, commanded by an officer galloping next to the door, His Majesty unable to escape the eagerness of the population that had spread beyond the city and was hailing him with cries of Vive l'Empereur. Once a few leagues out of town, did not wish to escort to go with him any further. He thanked the officer and the platoon and had each man given a gold Napoleon. Early in the afternoon of the same day, the emperor arrived at the sub-prefecture building in Rochefort. The carriages under the command of Count de Montholon arrived that night, and on the next day, July 4th, all the retinue was together. On the 5th, King Joseph arrived too.